investigation into the committed atrocities is not going to be very straightforward. Who could have information on them, and where, and how could this be obtained? Even talking about it to the wrong person can be dangerous for you if Ivanov is truly behind the mass arses. Whilst you have been pondering this dilemma, the battles have kept raging on. Government forces have made surprisingly little progress even after conquering the heavy vehicle factory. After some intelligence work, the main reason for this appears to be Nod's Ezekiel's wheel tanks, stealth tanks that perform surgical strikes on bases, harvesters, and vulnerable supplies. Another problem is the surprisingly fast rate of Tiberium growth on communist-controlled territory, which gives the enemy a high amount of Tiberium to harvest for resources. And the third problem is that communists seem to get significant extra manpower in the form of mercenaries from other ex-Soviet countries. With the enemy in control of the eastern state border, you are unable to stop the flow. You have often been discussing these three issues with Ivanov at the government military HQ. With the help of your most loyal contracts, these meetings have allowed you to conduct careful research into internal government files. There is an archive of communications, both physical and digital mail, and reports between many high-ranking government officials that is kept on a server located in a government tech center. The tech center itself is in a large government base that is situated far from the front line. Infiltrating it will hopefully answer your question. Going there yourself could raise suspicions, so it is safer to send a spy. There is little room for failure. You need the spy to avoid patrols, infiltrate the tech center, fetch the documents from the archive, and escape. This is your best chance of discovering the truth about government involvement in the atrocities. If the spy get caught, internal security levels will surely be raised within all government-controlled territory.
Waiting orders, of course. Very well. Of course. At once. Yes, sir. Agreed. Ready and waiting. Waiting orders. Of course. Very well. Agreed. Of course.
Building infiltrated.
Yes, sir. Of course. Very well. At once. At once. Very well. Of course. Of course.
First objective met.
Reporting. Very well. At once. Very well. Very well. Of course. Agreed. At once. Very well. Very well. At once. Of course. Very well. Very well. Very well. At once. At once. Very well. At once. Agreed. Of course. Very well. Agreed. At once. Very well. Agreed. At once. Of course. Of course. At once. Agreed. Agreed. At once. Agreed. Of course. At once. Of course. Of course. Of course. Agreed. At once. At once. Agreed. Very well. At once. Very well. Of course. Agreed. Report. Agreed. Of course. Very well. Of course. Reporting. Agreed. 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 Of course. Agreed. Agreed. Very well. Of course. At once. Of course. Very well. Agreed. Of course. Agreed. Of course. Agreed. Yes, sir. Agreed. Agreed. Very well. At once. Of course. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. At once. Agreed. Agreed. Of course. Agreed. At once. At once. Very well. Agreed. Waiting orders. Very well.
Second objective met.
Very well. Of course. Agreed. At once. At once. Agreed. Very well. At once. Agreed. Agreed. Of course. Very well. Agreed. At once. Agreed. 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 At once. Agreed. Of course. Of course. At once. Of course. Of course. Agreed. Of course. Agreed. Agreed. Of course. Very well. Yes, sir. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. 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 Of course. At once. Very well. Agreed. At once. Agreed. At once. Very well. At once. Very well. Very well. Agreed. Of course. Very well. Very well. Yes, sir. Agreed. Of course. At once. Agreed. At once. Of course. Agreed. Agreed. Very well. Of course. At once.
Third objective met. Mission accomplished.
The communication data you gather was vast. There was no quick way to go through it all. Dozens and dozens of pages of letters and reports. But finally, After spending sleepless nights on them, the situation seemed clear. The highest military leadership has been told to neutralize any civilians that could potentially side with the communist movement. Civilians who seemed unlikely to change their mind to cooperate with Ivanov's government were to be especially targeted. Only Ivanov himself wields the power for giving this kind of order. Toyka has not executed this order very efficiently, which is not surprising from him. But Toyka has not been completely passive. He has given his subordinates total freedom to loot and destroy the homes of any potential dissidents. Thus, whilst individual soldiers are involved, Ivanov and his government can be seen as responsible for the slaughter. Your next steps will have to be prepared carefully.